So this Sunday is set aside by the Unitarian Universalist Association as Association Sunday to reflect on the importance of ministry in our lives. The Association Sunday Committee is asking you to contribute to programs which strengthen the professional ministry in our faith, ministry that comes from members of the UU Ministers Association, Liberal Religious Education Directors Association called LREDA, and the UU Musicians Network, and for the UUA itself. And they suggested that ministers preach on this topic before taking a collection. Now, there's a lot of diversity in those ministries, and I tried really hard to find a way to speak about them all at once. I struggled trying to make sweeping statements about ministry, and I failed miserably, so I gave up. Instead, I'm going to tell you a few short stories, vignettes, which tell you about my vision of ministry, glimpses of holiness that might resonate with you, or they might remind you of a different story. Take it wherever it goes today, okay? The first story is about me. I moved to New Jersey in 1978 and lived for many years by myself. Now, working as an engineer up near Princeton. Now, some of you may know this already, but I'm a ham radio operator. And you actually wouldn't know it to look at me. I don't have like funny cauliflower ears from the headphones or a strange callus on my Morse code finger. In fact, I have the license, but I never use it, except for one weekend in the year. That weekend at the end of June is called Field Day. Amateur radio operators set up stations all across the country and spend 24 hours trying to talk to as many other stations as possible. And if that doesn't sound like fun to you, don't worry. You're far from alone. In fact, I had no friends in town or at work who could imagine any joy out of Field Day. But somehow somebody sent somebody a message that said, "Come help. We're setting up a station and we need more people to talk on the microphone." I didn't know them, but I went. That weekend came and I rode my bicycle over to that station. I helped them put up antennas, and then I spent 24 hours helping them make contacts, logging the call signs of stations we talked to. And when it was over, I rode my bicycle home and went back to my 9-to-5 job as if nothing had happened. The next year, I went back. Some folks said, "Hi, Charlie, you're back. Come over here and help." And I did. And I spent 24 hours making contacts, logging them. And then I rode my bicycle home and went back to my 9-to-5 job as if nothing had happened. The following year was much the same, though by then I had a car. And as the decades went on, I might actually have gone to one of the planning meetings each year. But for 24 hours, one day out of 365, I was somebody else. My life for the other 364 was of no consequence from the moment I arrived to the moment I left. And this went on for decades. Each time I went back to my 9-to-5 job as if nothing happened. But something had. My next story takes us to the Bahamas. I've never been there, but a friend of mine took a vacation there a couple of years ago, and it seems that they have resort hotels with swimming pools there. That's because this is where our story takes place. As she sat by the pool, she noticed an unusual scene at the next table. There was a nurse sitting quietly and a younger man in a wheelchair, wearing sunglasses and a Hawaiian shirt, and drinking some sort of drink with an umbrella in it. My friend struck up a conversation expecting that maybe they were on a family trip. The nurse explained that they were from Norway. She was working, but the man in the wheelchair, who had muscular dystrophy, was on vacation. It seems that he was on welfare, or the Norwegian equivalent of welfare, not a wealthy man at all, and that the Norwegian people had realized that a person's life was more worth living when he or she had a time to rest, a holiday, a vacation. And the Norwegian people reasoned, just because someone has a physical disability, just because they couldn't earn any money, doesn't mean their life isn't worth living. Every person deserves a vacation. And so the young man was spending a week at this hotel in the Bahamas. The next story I got from one of Kurt Vonnegut's books, Welcome to the Monkey House. Maybe, did we talk about this back a month ago? I wasn't here. We had a discussion about Kurt Vonnegut. But there's a short story in there called Who Am I This Time? And it takes place on Cape Cod, where Harry, a very private and quiet man, works in a hardware store. And then one day, Helene, who was a shy woman who just moved into town, and Harry are cast as leads in the community theater production of Streetcar Named Desire. And through their roles, they become passionately expressive lovers. But when the show closes, they go back to their quiet, separate lives. For the next production, they're again cast as the leads, and again they are in love, only to go home after the final curtain call. In the end, they discover that the only way they come alive is through theater, and they live happily ever after as Romeo and Juliet, or Kate and Petruchio, or perhaps now we would include Princess Buttercup and Wesley, or, and I had to look this one up, Hokey Coburn and Miss Daisy. Theater provides their means of connection. The next of my disconnected stories is another come help story. 2 years after the flooding from Hurricane Katrina, I was in New Orleans. The 3 Unitarian Universalist congregations who'd lost many of their members, they got together and sponsored a program for rebuilding the city. People were invited to come down and stay in First Church and then work on the various rebuilding programs around the city. I was there from California. I was still in seminary. And there were several folks down from the state of Maine. At this point, it was just a couple from Maine and myself. We worked together that day, putting up wallboard and tearing out some moldy, rotten walls. There were hundreds of other groups in the city working on rebuilding. Methodists and socialists, even a large number of Canadian auto workers. But this vignette is from the St. Charles Tavern, a simple eatery that didn't flood. We were there eating dinner one night after working in another part of the city, when the server came over and asked, "Are you folks from out of town?" She actually could tell that immediately from the way we were talking. "Yes," we said. "And are you working on the rebuilding?" And she asked this even though she could see that we were wearing steel-toed shoes and there was plaster dust all over our clothing. "Yes," we said. "Thank you," she said softly. And then she went over to serve another table. A congregation I was in once had a year where they tried new forms of religious education. They encouraged us to offer short courses. So I put in for a morning experience called Sketching Winter Trees. A small group of us met on a snow-covered Sunday morning and walked out past the parking lot. I'm sorry I mentioned snow, by the way. We met on a snow-covered Sunday morning and walked out past the parking lot and into the forest. There were only 4 or 5 of us, including a 12-year-old boy and his father. I explained to the group that normally we identify trees by their leaves or by their fruit or color or flowers, but that in winter they have no leaves or flowers or fruit, and most of them are just some sort of wet black color. I gave each person some charcoal and paper and told them to see the tree as a living being. Each one has its own strategy for survival based on its genus or species. And so their growth can be seen as an individual effort to survive, some with more success than others. And that we could see their effort and sketch each tree as it was. Well, some years later, I saw the father again, though the family had moved away to Washington, D.C. He was up on business, and so he came to church. And he told me that the story of the trees had struck his son, stuck with him. They continued to talk about it as the years went forward, and in some ways, it changed the boy's life. Now, the last story takes place in a larger congregation. The Unitarian Universalist Association had a push a few years ago to start covenant groups. That's a good idea, actually. It's a sort of a small group ministry. The idea is that as congregations get bigger, it's hard to know everyone, and so new people and quiet people have trouble finding their place, have trouble getting to know people. And as the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the South Jersey Shore, which I'm getting very good at saying fast, as we grow, we're going to find that that's true here too. Perhaps it's already true. But in this story, we have the minister trying to explain how these small group ministry things are going to work. Then one of the members of the choir stood up and said, "I already have a small group ministry. My church meets Tuesday nights when we have choir rehearsal." And here's a related bit to that story. A friend of mine who's gay, he really needed community. He needs community to feel alive, and his job was not doing it for him. And so he joined the gay men's chorus And that became his church. The conductor was the equivalent of the senior minister, and the small barbershop group that he was in was his small group ministry. He needed to sing. He needed to belong. He drew such strength from his work there that he positively shone when it was time for the full concert. No, he wasn't a soloist. He was part of the chorus, and it was very good. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. A decade earlier, he was looking for the spark. A decade earlier, he was part of a group hoping to find a way to change the hearts of the United States of America. Dr. King had read Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. That was our second reading this morning. Dr. King was waiting for a way. He was waiting for the moment. And then there was Rosa Parks and the incident on the bus, as perhaps the local press reported it. And then there was the bus boycott, and then there were ripples of social change that spread out to transform our country. Today we live in a social system that often fails to nurture the individual. Too many of us find working towards survival to be our job, rather than working towards self-actualized fabulousness. And we see ourselves as powerless. One of the hopeful signs in my book is this Occupy Wall Street phenomenon. I don't know much about it. I only know that it's come into the press a little bit. The reports really need some people who've seen it firsthand. I hope that if any of you have been involved in this, that you'll share after the service. Ours is the faith of communication, not of silence. A faith of community, not of isolation. We need to hear the words, hear the revelations of our day. And we congregate in a spirit of openness. May our ministry be of the past, of the present, and of the future. Friends, the work of ministry is powerful work. It can keep us alive. It can show us new directions for growth. It can show us our own strength and help us soar. Heidi, Barbara, and I all have our own assigned ministries. Heidi is using 2 UUA curricula this year to guide our older children in coming of age and to teach younger children and their parents the Our Whole Lives Sexuality curriculum. Her work is ministry to children, to parents, and to the teachers as well. Barbara, too, is branching out. This year, she's working with other music professionals on a special district-wide conference this winter. I hope you ask her about it when she comes back from her short vacation. And me, I'm working towards a minister's study conference this November, studying ways of growing our beloved community. We are each and all proud to serve this congregation and this movement, which we love deeply. It's appropriate that I end with the words of W.E.B. Du Bois. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. It is today that we fit ourselves for the greater usefulness of tomorrow. Today is the seed time, now are the hours of work, and tomorrow comes the harvest and the playtime. Our closing hymn is by Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Jason Shelton, whose ministry is music, and it's entitled Now is the Time. It was composed for the first Association Sunday back in 2007, and you will notice that it's based on those words of W.E.B. Du Bois. The words to our closing hymn are on the, is this pink or is it, what color is this? Lavender. Oh boy. Man, it's another thing I have to learn. On the back of the lavender, or the front of the lavender, depending on which way you put it, insert. And are you going to have members of the choir going to come up and help? Very good.